This is the Kratom Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. My guest is Soren Shade. Originally from West Virginia, Soren studied at Columbia University under Dr. Carl Hart, went on to produce Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, and co-founded a company dedicated to the science and development of Kratom as a tea. So you grew up on a family farm. That's pretty cool. What kind of farm was it?
Yeah, this is one thing I noticed that was very similar in our backgrounds, especially being you're out of Pittsburgh, I'm out of the northern part of West Virginia, right on the Ohio River.
Oh, no
So
shit.
Pittsburgh is actually the closest city to me.
Cool.
If I want to take a Greyhound or a Megabus or fly, it's an hour 45 trip up the river to Pittsburgh I go. And your farming background. So I am a sixth generation West Virginian, same farm that my great grandfather built,
That
or
is awesome.
farmhouse that my great grandfather built. And I really am one of the few people who in my family who have left from that farm and have gone on to do other things. But it was a dairy farm up until the 50s when refrigeration put the milkman out of business, and we went with them. And so it has really just been a home base that we've called the farm since since before I was born. It's largely Appalachian wilderness, deciduous trees. So I spent most of my childhood not doing farming tasks per se. I mean, I tilled and I pulled up potatoes and such, but we were never subsistence farming. It was a place to hang our hats at the end of the day. My parents were primarily involved in a small cafe pub business that they started in the small town, just trying to inject some culture back into what is ostensibly a dying community. But yeah, so my farm background is just being an only child running through the wilderness, falling in love with the flora and the fauna and the fungi of the area, and really just kind of obsessing over, what alkaloids, what properties they have, what traditional medicinal or folk healing facets are associated with what just kind of looks like a forest to the untrained eye. And I would say that was, that origin, being in nature and being surrounded by it, definitely primed me for where I'm at now and what I'm doing.
You went to Columbia with philosophy and American Studies major, so that's interesting that you had like a general interest in science and plants.
Yeah, I was very lucky to the way things played out for me. I received a postcard in the mail the beginning of my senior year in high school. That was from an organization called Questbridge. It's for high achieving, low income students, and it was in the early stages of that organization's existence whenever I was reached out to it. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information to be found on the internet about it, but it seemed legit. And I ended up applying for that. And what they did was people that were accepted into this scholarship program were waived admission or not admission, but application fees, which are generally $80 or so for colleges.
Yeah.
And so I was able to apply to 37 colleges once I got this, mostly because
awesome.
I knew I wanted desperately to get out of this town, which was dying and sad, and my friends had no real incentive to leave themselves. And so I felt kind of stranded and alone, and saw
Yeah.
myself just being the seventh generation to be born and die on that farm. And so I just desperately spent my whole senior year applying to all of their partner colleges, and I ended up getting accepted into a majority of them. And Columbia, I actually made a little bit of money going to Columbia, how well my scholarships were. So that was really the whole reason I picked Columbia, was because they had such a phenomenal financial aid and scholarship package prepared for me. And so when I entered into Columbia, my focus was on the sciences. I started off as a neuroscience major, and I was involved with the neuroscience club, and I was very obsessed with this. But then it was towards the end of my first semester where I was just taken aback by a comment made in class by the professor, which was just all right, you all accept the notion or the premise that free will does not exist. Consciousness and the sensation of free will is an epiphenomena caused by neurochemical activity. Bang. Okay, on to the next thing. Let's start memorizing neuroanatomy. And I'm just like, whoa, we're just going to throw free will out the window like that first thing and not really talk about it. I've got some questions that I need answered. I mean, this is very fascinating, and I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And they said, sorry, buddy, wrong department. You need to go to philosophy. And so I went to the philosophy department. And so my focus has always been the phenomena of consciousness, really. And I thought the best place to explore that would be neuroscience. And when I got to Columbia, the first questions that I wanted to ask just did not fit that department. And so I moved on to philosophy, but I was fortunate enough to be able to tailor my career back down this scientifically oriented exploration of consciousness with Hamilton, of course, being the epitome of strange consciousness exploration.
And so you began working for him as a research assistant in 2018, and I guess that's during like the first couple seasons, right?
No, so I started working with him as a researcher in an interim period between season 2 and season 3.
Oh, okay, cool.
And he actually took off. He didn't immediately start producing season 3 following season 2 because he had a movie deal tentatively lined up that ultimately, over some legal troubles, is still caught up, and there's a lot of friction surrounding it, and there's really no date set as to when production of that will begin. And so what happened was there was this gap, and I just reached out to him, and I just kind of explained who I am and my interests, and I was very willing to help. And so I worked with him as a research assistant for some written articles that he was working on at the time, and got to know him. And then season 3 being renewed corresponded almost perfectly with my graduation. And Hamilton and I had such a great working and personal relationship that he asked that I come on as a researcher, and things just kind of went from there. And I ended up, we finished the season with me being credited as a producer as well as a researcher.
That's great. That seems like an awesome job. So that's out now, season 3. It just came out, and
Yes.
do a thing
have you seen any of it?
You know what? I have not seen it, but I was looking through, and it looks cool. I like. I'm looking at the titles, and I like that there's a positive methamphetamine story. It kind of goes along, like with Carl Hart. He's talking about how he uses heroin, and it's to a positive outcome. And what was your favorite episode, actually?
Oh, my favorite episode. They all bled into each other. I think my favorite as a viewer was Ultra LSD. Maybe one of the first ones, or my favorite to produce, was the first episode, which was focused on journalist mistakes. And what's interesting behind that story, kind of tying things together with Carl Hart, was a good friend of mine, Sam Weber, who I'm in who him and I are co-founders of Top Tree, and we're doing the tea bags. We met in Carl Hart's class at Columbia.
Oh, really? And he was there. That's right.
He's a fantastic scientist, a wonderful professor, and a very generous advisor to what we're doing right now with Kratom. And the first reading that he had in class for Sam and I and everyone else was an excerpt from a book called Licit and Illicit Drugs by Edward Bleecker, I believe.
Okay,
And he
cool.
tells the story of a glue sniffing phenomena in Colorado in the 60s. And essentially what the crux of the story was that there was a tiny little glue sniffing phenomena. Someone discovered that there was a volatile solvent in there that could have similar GABAergic effects to that of alcohol or whatnot. And they would sniff this airplane glue. And a journalist, desperate for content, heard about this and wrote a big story about it. And following his story, in which he essentially he said, "Wow, kids are sniffing glue to get high. What they do is they take out all the glue from and then name the product, put it in a bag, and then inhale 5 times, breathe fresh air, and then do it again. And they're getting quite the buzz." And then what they saw after that, of course, was an explosion of glue sniffing incidents across the country, everywhere that this newspaper was released. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, people have to learn how to do something some way or the other, and you know, the thesis of this was that, you know, the way that you talk about these substances and the way you present them, you know, has a bigger impact than you would think. And so the first episode of Pharmacopeia of season 3 is called Synthetic Toad Venom Machine, which is a different story. Begins with Hamilton obsessing over the tiny little journalist mistakes he's made in the past, because we recognize how serious highly publicized mistakes like this can have, especially within a world as sensitive and stigmatized and with so much miseducation prevalent as the world of psychoactive substances.
Yeah.
And so the episode's, you know, focus was on correcting these mistakes, talking about a gentleman who had been ruined by a horrible news story about his possession of 3 toads, four toads, Hans, Franz, Peter, and Brian, in the, let's see, in the 80s. And he ended up not committing a crime, but because these stories were so sensationalized, they ruined his career. And this was the beginning of essentially you lick a toad and you can get high, or lick a frog and you get high.
Yeah, I remember
myth.
hearing that.
Yeah, which is not really true. The toad in question is
you probably get salmonella.
Yeah, you would at the very least get funny looks from anyone that saw you licking these poor guys.
Yeah. Oh, I think I saw the clip from Rogan where Hamilton was talking about that.
Yeah. This has been a really big. It's been a big thing for Hamilton and I and everyone else in the season. We've actually re-released a pamphlet and some apparel dedicated to the toad and educating people that there are ethically better and environmentally better ways of procuring 5-methoxy DMT than from the capturing and harvesting and essentially like assaulting of these toads.
Yeah.
And all the money that we've raised in the releasing of this pamphlet and apparel, which has been about $180,000 so far, which is quite miraculous, and it blows both of us away, is going to toad conservation and the Michael J. Foundation for Parkinson research, since the inspiration of publicizing the pamphlet and this alternative method came from a gentleman named Ken Nielsen, who passed away in 2019, end of 2019, Parkinson's.
Doctor, I'm glad. That's cool that you had him as a professor. That's awesome.
I really love the guy. I think what he's doing is incredibly brave.
Oh yeah, the idea of coming out of the closet as a drug user, because all we see are, I mean, once you know a person uses drugs if they have a problem with it, because then it becomes obvious.
Absolutely.
It's just awesome, and the book is great. It's so he knows, you can tell he knows so much with all that primary research he did, and he writes it out very simply so any idiot like me can read it.
It's a wonderfully accessible book. Yeah,
Yeah,
I also loved it. He's able to jump between being the leading expert in his field and just endlessly name studies and cite everything, and you just know that he's not talking out of his ass.
yeah, yeah,
But he's also able to explain things on, 5 different levels of complexity. People can, sometimes, people would ask what seemed like a very simple question in class, and he was able to take a breath and repeat the question and then answer it very simply. And I come from, in the middle of nowhere, Appalachia, which is, in the midst of what's like to be claimed the quote unquote opioid epidemic. And,
yeah,
coming into Carl Hart's class, I had, even with what I consider to be a very open mind and drug positive attitude, I was still, methamphetamine, heroin, hard opiates, they're not good, man. You should really stay away from them. They
yeah.
are just objectively bad. And you can't tell me otherwise, because I have friends who've overdosed and died. I've seen
Mhm.
friends snorting them on soccer buses or on buses on the way to soccer games, and
Yeah,
and just being just gonked, and through high school, and then seeing homeless people living under a bridge in a town of 4,000. It's just easy to say, oh, because they're on meth, man. They're on the dope. And you're going
yeah,
into Hart's class and just being patiently taught how to go through the scientific literature, how to read, studies, and dissect the bullshit from the substance, and being made, the first big thing, at the time, 2018, I believe, when I was in Hart's class, and the big headline was 72,000 Americans died of opioids overdose in the past year. Okay, wow, that's horrible. It's obviously a big problem. We need to deal with it. The New York Times reporting it on the front page. Well,
yeah,
let's look into that. Oh, 53 or 54,000 of those were in combination with a benzodiazepine or alcohol or some other substance that is a contraindication with an opioid that causes, respiratory inhibition to occur more rapidly and frequently, and that only 19,000 Americans died of opioid overdose without anything else in their substance,
yeah,
which, according to Hart, I mean, that's less than the amount of Americans who die of car wrecks every year. And you don't see us scrutinizing cars for their safety endlessly on 24/7 news, and anyone that has a car is considered a bad person because they need it to help out their life. And then it allowed me to, like a light bulb moment. I kind of reframe my perspective, and I've come home, and it's just so obvious. There's no jobs here. There's a horrible education system. There's nothing to look forward to. The culture left 40 years ago.
hmm,
People are depressed,
yeah,
very, very depressed. People don't have health care. People can't go to the doctor. What do? They keep doing something that makes them feel good, because
yeah,
there's nothing else that makes them feel good. I mean, it was just incredible just how much programming was overlaid on top of my eyes coming here before that. And I would dismiss um, scenes of poverty as not my problem, not society's problem. It's their problem because they have self-control issues. And it's easy to say that, but it's more complicated than that. And people are hurting, and these substances help them hurt less. And without education, there is a horrible liability, or a greater liability for abuse or danger or overdose and withdrawal symptoms because they don't know what they're doing. But that's not a problem of the substance in question. That is a problem of prohibition and misinformation proliferation. And I mean, that really kind of, just that attitude, just that being able to read the papers and dissect, science from opinion was the methodology that led to, reevaluating my relationship with Kratom from, eating powder and coughing and drooling and really not liking it, but enjoying the effect that it had on me, to reading about it and going, oh my God. Ever since the first documented use in 1826, this has been made as a tea, and no one has eaten the leaf, like actually swallowed the leaf, until 2000 and something. Like, why am I swallowing the leaf here? Why can't I buy a tea product? What is this conspiracy to make me hurt my stomach by swallowing grams of powdered lignocellulose that I don't need when I just want an extraction of some alkaloids that can easily be made with hot water and some lemon? So yeah, I mean, it's really just how freeing that moment with Hart was, and just being able to think for myself when it came to these things.
The Hamilton show goes into places where these substances are used traditionally, and finds out the history and all that stuff about them. And the one, I think it was season 2, but it was Maria Sabina and the mushrooms, Oaxaca, and that's one I've read up on a lot. Going back to first saw it on Arrowwood in the '90s or something. But but that's the whole. She was quoted as saying, and something I read, and maybe it was Wasson. Was that the guy's name?
Gordon Wasson.
Yeah. And she said, because all the hippies came down, and it's Bob Dylan, it became a cool thing to go to Mexico and take mushrooms with Maria Sabina, and she was actually quoted as saying, the young people in the funny clothes came, and the mushrooms, I'm paraphrasing, and the mushrooms, and I'm also doing it in English, but she said the mushrooms lost their power, she said. That kind of speaks to misuse. We find these traditional things, and that gets me to Kratom. It's like you were saying, it's always been used as a tea. Now that we have Kratom in America, of course we have to shove it down our throats like everything else. And I say that as somebody that drinks too much and eats too much food. So is there a danger? I mean, it's already kind of going on. And I don't even want to say danger, but like with Kratom, like with misusing it.
With all things, going back to our absolute, the first bit of this conversation and talking about water toxicity, I tend to side with Paracelsus, the Swiss alchemist of the 15th century, who, said the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. And of course you can misuse anything. You can have too much water, you can have too much coffee, you can have too much alcohol, you can have too much Kratom. And the things that lead to a misuse the most, I don't think is the substance in question, but rather the social context around it. Cocaine, for example, is a good metaphor, analogy to draw here. In Bolivia and Peru, when I spent time there, everyone 10 to 80 always has a mouthful of coca leaves, and it imparts nutritional value. It stimulates them. They work hard all day, every day, and they're in a good mood, and there's no social issues with it. But because of the context of prohibition and it being made illegal, yet it's still being highly desirable, and there being a market based around it, the pursuit of efficiency has happened. And so coca is no longer consumed, coca leaves, but rather it's extracted for the cocaine freebase and powdered and then shipped highly concentrated form to the United States, in which now there is a danger of being crippled with withdrawal, being addicted, or potentially overdosing from either the cocaine itself or something that has been spiked with it, all in the name of profit, all under the umbrella of prohibition. And so the traditional preparation of a coca tea or chewing on the coca leaf, I would say, is one of the safest things that one can do. It doesn't present a lot of danger prima facie, but whenever it's then extracted and sent to the United States and there's not a lot of education around it, it does present some danger. And I think the same kind of economics is in place with the export and import of Kratom right now, especially with the FDA's import ban. You're not getting fresh leaves shipped, refrigerated, over to the United States that are meant to be chewed one at a time after pulling off the spine and putting a little bit of sugar in the middle and then spitting it out after 10 seconds, as is a traditional practice. Or they're not being shipped here to be made into a tea, because with the water extraction, you are not necessarily getting every last alkaloid out of there. There's some inefficiency built into that tea process, and that inefficiency does play a part in the safety profile of tea versus consuming something, grams and grams and grams at a time at a highly micronized powder, all in the pursuit of getting the most bang for your buck. And so I think the danger of the toxicity, the danger or the problems that come from Kratom in a lot of ways.
But how is it actually prepared traditionally?
So traditionally in Thailand and Malaysia, wherever Kratom grows, Thailand specifically for this context, it's chewed. It's plucked from the tree fresh, destemmed, rolled into a tight little pack, or maybe like a mini Snicker bar size rolled up leaf, and chewed on the right side, chewed on the left side. Touch your tongue all over, you touch your cheeks over, and you spit it out within 5 seconds, or right about the time where you start to feel a little tingly or numbness develop in the mouth. And that was it. That's it for them. In and out. They don't really swallow anything, and they're utilizing a relatively small surface area of the leaf in contact with their mucous membrane of the mouth, and putting it directly in contact with the blood flow, and presumably bypassing a lot of the liver's metabolic and biotransformational actions, being right in the blood and passing first pass metabolism. And secondly, as another way that's consumed, is fresh leaves or dried leaves are put into a pot or a cauldron, and they let that steep for 3 or 4 hours, and there's a very long steep time associated with it, in which a lot of the water is kind of boiled off, so it's a bit more of a concentrated beverage. And then today it's generally water. Empty water bottles are filled about halfway at midday, and then sipped on or drank all at once to finish the day of hard labor. And so the traditional methods for the use in conjunction with labor are being chewed or drank as a tea. There are other like folk medicinal practices that concern wrapping the leaf in sugar and then chewing on it for several minutes to I don't want to say cure, but the folk medicine practitioners of Thailand suggest one uses it when they have a cough. It's not a treatment or cure of any kind of disease. This is repeating the folk practice of people. Well, yeah. So those are the traditional methods, and none of them notably involve swallowing the leaf matter. None of them.
Because I was going to say, because it was in the Hamilton Kratom episode where he puts it in sugar, and I thought he did swallow it. I remembered it wrong, but that's just chewing and spitting it out. So there's no actual eating of the leaves traditionally at all.
I mean, you're chewing on it. You might have a piece or two follow down your throat, but no one's going through the process of making a big smoothie with 20 grams of leaves, or powdering it, or just eating leaves one by one and swallowing it like a goat would or something. That's,
Yeah.
Our stomachs are a little bit more sensitive than
That'd be
that.
kind of
And
like chewing tobacco, and you spit that out. I wouldn't swallow that. Um,
yeah, one of my favorite analogies, is I grew up in a coffee shop and with an espresso machine and all that, is, we would get the coffee beans in and they would be roasted, and then we would grind them and prepare them for the customer. But then right after they're ground, just put it in a cup and give it to the customer, and they take a spoon and just start chewing away on some ground coffee beans. It's like, no, that's not how you use coffee.
yeah.
We recognize that that's a rather foul tasting way of getting the caffeine that we
Yeah.
want from the coffee beans. We found that you can make a concentrated beverage we call espresso, and then even some people aren't happy with the flavor of espresso, so we've developed cappuccinos and lattes and milkshakes, and
Yeah.
all sorts of delightful ways of disguising the flavor from this plant, while still receiving the desirable effects. And with kratom, we've ground up the coffee beans, we've ground up the kratom leaves, but we've stopped before we've made it something pleasurable, something good, something desirable. And you can have really simple, easy, delicious kratom tea. You can get infused kratom tea with passion fruit, or lemon myrtle or mint, and all sorts of delicious things in it, and turned it into like the kratom version of a cappuccino that's actually delicious in its own right and still delivers the effects and the properties that people want out of kratom without, getting green powder everywhere and on your face and looking like someone that your family is going to have questions over.
Yeah. Yeah, I do mine in a French press. I think I did the lemon once, but I was gonna ask, and it doesn't taste that bad. I put a little bit of honey in it, not even that much, and it's not like people are, oh, I hate the taste of it. I take it because I have to for my pain, but it's like, why? What? You have pain? Why are you torturing yourself even further? But what's okay? So I mean, I've heard this everywhere, and that your page, that's such a great page on there about the tea that I'm looking at right now, considering the chemistry.
We're trying to make people's lives, a little bit better. I
Yeah,
mean, I was, eating kratom powder for years before I had this realization, and it has made a marked improvement in my life, and everything from the way my stomach feels to my bowel movements. Like
yeah, yeah.
eating kratom is not something I'm ever going to return to.
So, what's the significance of the acids and the citrus fruit? What does that do? Does it to why is it good to mix that with tea?
Yeah, so we're still digging into it, and we've partnered with a big lab, and who are running some studies of that right now, trying to figure out exactly what is going on. But the theory that our understanding of chemistry suggests now is that mitragynine and the other kratom alkaloids, based on the mitragynine scaffold,
Mhm.
are fairly water insoluble, and which would explain the very long steep time of the traditional Thai tea method of 3 or 4 hours at high heat and boiling off a lot of the water. That's a long time to make a tea. Usually doesn't, when you're making something like with Camellia sinensis, like the typical black tea or green tea, you don't steep for that long, you get the caffeine out in time. But because mitragynine and these other alkaloids are fairly water insoluble, it takes a while. But so the theory is that adding lemon or lime or a citric acid containing fruit, it could be citric acid in of itself, will change the mitragynine into mitragynine as a citric acid salt, which is, there's a free nitrogen in these alkaloids, and attaching a citric acid to it makes it a salt with a lower water solubility, and it precipitates faster in water that way. So essentially what you're doing is you want to have an equal amount of mitragynine alkaloids with an equal amount of free citric acid molecules, and they will marry, and their partnership will yield a more water soluble mitragynine alkaloid that has the same. This is again theory. It's not been tested. We're running these tests now, but with similar pharmacological properties. The salt usually does not affect what salt form a molecule in usually does not affect the way it acts with the body, but it does affect the water solubility in the tea, and therefore adding lemon will improve the taste and make the tea stronger quicker. Yes. So what I do and what I recommend everyone, it's after a lot of trial and error, has been to put about 2 tea bags into a thermos. I squeeze half a lemon over it, or I give about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons worth of lemon juice concentrate, and I pour it over the tea bags, and I just let it sit in the lemon juice while my water is coming to a boil. And then I'll put the boiling water over top of the lemon juice tea bag infusion, and fill up the thermos, close it off, and give it 20 minutes. So it stays at nearly boiling temperature, and it is a slightly acidic solution. And after 20 minutes, I have a very effective and very delicious kratom tea. At that point, I will add, if it's just plain kratom leaf and lemon, I'll add some sugar or honey, some hibiscus, maybe some turmeric and ginger. But there are also kratom tea bags out there now that already have other herbal components to them, like rooibos or lemon myrtle or mint, that it's all there, bang for your buck, bada bing, bada boom. You don't have to do a whole lot else to improve the flavor. Adding that lemon at that stage for a plain kratom tea is crucial for the full effect.
Looking at the maximizing your brew, and steep your kratom tea bags in water at a full boil for about 10 minutes. Now, that contradicts a lot of what I've seen on the internet. People say boiling kills the alkaloids. So is that a myth?
Well, that's another question that has not been fully elucidated. It would, it's not uncommon for molecules to be heat sensitive and degrade over time, and with more rapidity at higher temperatures. With kratom, personal bioassays, I noticed that the strength increases with a higher temperature, because while it is more likely for a molecule to degrade quicker at higher temperature, higher temperatures also facilitate a greater solubility. And so it's this kind of balancing act. The higher the temperature, the more alkaloids you're going to get out of the leaf, but at the same time, you might be degrading it. But from personal experience, it doesn't seem that a 10 to 20 minute simmer or boil has any effect on it. I've seen on YouTube people have a more or less a low boil for 3 or 4 hours when they do a big weekly prep of a kratom tea. And this also kind of goes back to just reading some of these early accounts of traditional kratom use, where kratom leaves were left in a pot over a fire for 4 or 5 hours to boil off half the water. And I mean, if they found it to deliver the properties that they wanted well enough to continue this methodology or continue this the way of making tea for hundreds of years, then that's an indicator, anecdotally from a tradition, not scientifically founded, that mitragynine and mitragynine alkaloids have a greater ability to withstand heat than a lot of these Reddit scientists have have said.
Yeah,
But this is a part of the food science of kratom tea, kratom as a food, and not mitragynine alkaloids as a drug, but kratom tea as a food that need to be studied and that are absent right now. And that once these things will come out, much the same way that we know, if you're making coffee, you want to use around 190 degree temperature water at certain bars out of your espresso machine to get the best coffee. Like, we want to know what the pressure, what the temperature, what the acid, what all these come together to make the best kratom tea possible is. And so this is a lot of science that we've currently we just set the motion on right now, and we're very interested to see the results once this comes back.
That's awesome. So, yeah, that's another kind of misconception, because some people think, well, the tea's weaker, I'm gonna lose all my alkaloids in that sludge. So that's not exactly true at all, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean, as a tea, I mean, you do it right, it can be potent. You want to start with one or two tea bags and work your way up. And I found that most people are pretty content with when they hit the two tea bag mark. Even people who had been taking, what was like the average of 4.2 grams of kratom powder a day, we're finding that, the equivalent of 4 grams of crushed leaf kratom brewed into a tea delivered the effects that they were used to and that they wanted. We've received people, hitting us up on social media who said that they had stomach discomfort, and they were looking for a way to continue getting the effects that they wanted from kratom. Why not doing this? And they were led to tea, but they could never make it work. But then they read our blog, and they followed the simple process of putting some lemon and letting it sit in a thermos in hot water for 20 minutes. He found it to be super effective, and actually had to tone down the amount of kratom they were using because it ended up being too potent for them. Which, it's good. It's almost good to hear that, because it's a proof of concept. Like, yes, this is the right way to take kratom. It's not weaker. It is made correctly. It can be equipotent.
Like, it sounds like you're doing a lot of kind of just the science there itself.
Yeah, I mean, that is mine and my co-founders Sam's focus, and also coming from, a background, a relationship with Hamilton, and background with Dr. Hart.
Yeah.
We're very focused on the science, and we take the truth seriously. We don't want to misconstrue anything for any kind of bottom line, because ultimately that's not going to be good. What we're doing is we're really happy that we were able to improve our kratom experience with a tea, and we kind of want to share that. Because kratom has, I was just listening to your last podcast, and with was it Gina?
Dion.
Dion, yeah, right, because you made the mustard joke at the beginning.
Yeah.
Dion, and this is so important. This is so important, and so this needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And to take something seriously in today's day and age, you have to follow the science. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is just reinvest, what we're able to get out of this good idea into developing the science behind kratom tea as a food product.
Yeah.
And normalize it and make it so that people don't have to be embarrassed in their use of a plant leaf that affects them positively. I mean, there was a time when coffee was considered a satanic activity. Bach, Johannes Sebastian Bach, the famous composer,
Yeah.
wrote a song called the Coffee Cantata in 1730 about a father who was threatening to take away his daughter's right to marry her beloved because she kept drinking coffee every day, and it was a satanic thing. Like substances go through wide societal changes, and ultimately, obviously, coffee has managed to embed itself pretty firmly with our culture, and it benefits people's lives immensely. Mine, and my
Me too.
parents and my grandparents, they all take coffee and they benefit from it. And so that's what I really think that kratom could have a similar beneficial effect society at large if it was adopted and normalized. And really do think that following the science and presenting it as a tea are the ways to do that, are the ways to save it from social condemnation and to save it from being destroyed by the FDA, because tea is, in everyone's mind, a food product, not a drug. I mean, caffeine, a lot of people say, is a drug, but the way it's dealt with in society is not as a drug so much as a food product. The same could be said for one of the most deadly substances that we engage with regularly, is that of alcohol. It is a drug, but so many people use it in a casual manner that, by and large, one of the better ways to think about it practically is as a food item, and how to have a healthy relationship with it that way. And traditionally, kratom tea is a food item, and we're just trying to bring it into the good graces of American society, as a delightful food item, this kratom tea. And again, I guess I kind of didn't fully get into your question there. So a lot of our scientific ventures are focused on the simple food questions: nutritional value, full alkaloid profile, expiration dates, just little things like that. Like, what is an equimolar ratio of citric acid found in lemons? And let the drug research, the research into extracting individual mitragynine alkaloids and then playing around with the scaffold to develop better opioid agonists, the treatment of pain that are less addictive and don't recruit beta-arrestin pathways. Like, that's all good, and that is definitely drug research. But that kind of granularity and minutia and development of the alkaloids, that fits the drug world way more than a very mild tea does.
Do you guys have an actual, because I'm looking at a picture of a greenhouse. Is that your greenhouse with kratom
Yes,
plants?
sir.
Hell yeah, that's awesome.
Very proud of it. They are mature now. They are 3 years old, coming on 4. So they'll make your mouth numb chewing on it. We actually have Dr. Oliver Grunman analyzing our tea, the leaves right now, the fresh leaves, this first analysis that he's performing right now is focused on any potential contaminants. Like, if kratom, like cannabis, is a bioaccumulator, and which would explain, all this talk of heavy metal contamination, we would learn pretty quickly if our greenhouse was safe or not with Grunman. And so we're doing that first. But they were on a winter diet, the ones that are sent with him. We keep them in the greenhouse, and these guys grow quick. So in the wintertime, we put them on 1/100th of the fertilizer that they normally need, to keep them from growing outside their confines. And so that's what Grunman's actually digging into now. And just by chewing on it, I know they're not as strong in the winter with their diet as they are in the summer. And so we're very confident that these leaves are clean. They don't have any heavy metals in it. But once we get this information back from Grunman, it'll be our leaves will have been on a full diet for several weeks. Then we're going to send him some more leaves, and he's going to do some more research on it, and then just kind of see what the alkaloid profile of our Appalachian strain is. So
you're
very
in West
excited.
Virginia now. You're back in West
That's
Virginia?
I've been all over the place, man. COVID has just wreaked havoc of my 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 landing
I
place.
mean,
But you know,
is
this is the
Top Tree
blessing of working online.
is Top Tree out of West Virginia?
We are a Denver-based company.
Oh, cool.
Um, that's where co-founder Sam, he was in the cannabis industry before he decided to move on to Kratom with this idea that we had, and he was with a startup that was focused on cannabis cleaning, decontaminating it using ozone to kill fungi or bacteria that were present on it. So he's coming from a background in 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 cleanliness of cannabis, and so we're hyper focused on that same kind of being very methodical and scrutinizing every bit of our plants and our greenhouse and our area to make sure that they're clean and that nothing's going to show up. And then if there anything comes up, you know, can it be cleaned? How could it be cleaned? You know, it's just with that background. But we're based out of Denver, which one of the great ironies of it is that in Denver, kratom is illegal to sell for
Yeah.
human consumption, and so that's another of our big focuses.
Place where you can smell pot literally everywhere.
And psilocybin mushrooms are also decriminalized.
That's right.
Which
That's
is
right.
a great thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
kratom is, you have to put not for human consumption. We're not going to do that. We're not focused on being dishonest. And so what that does is that instills a very strong and passionate alliance between us and the AKA, because we want to lobby, we want to overturn this stupid law in Denver as soon as possible. So our greenhouse is right now being used only for research properties. You know, we're giving American leaves to any researcher that reach out to us. We're just trying to learn about it, trying to see if it's viable. It's going to be you know, Q3 or maybe early 2021. We'll try to do some fresh leaf options, make that available, since we are focused on this traditional aspect of it. So that gives us fresh leaves to chew on, and kratom tea. Kratom tea is delicious, and fresh leaves to chew on's pretty astringent, but there's, you know, a lot of people who have, you know, been using kratom for a long time. They have a relationship with it, and they want to feel less alienated with it. And so getting a fresh leaf and they can see the whole beauty of it, you know, is a great experience, and it's effective, and it's a little different than the tea.
I totally try. Like, I want to try. Ever since I saw the Hamilton episode where he chews on, I'm like, yeah, that looks pretty good. A little bit of sugar on there.
Yeah, it's very important for, I think, the kratom industry, being consumers and vendors, producers, importers, everyone to collaborate, to be allies right now. To, there's, the AKA is a great figurehead in this, but it's still too early to be cutthroat competitive, to be doing stupid things like Krypton and putting O-desmethyltramadol in there, because it's individual, like, rogue players in the kratom world that are trying to get, a quick dollar that can ruin lives, literally, because there are people, as you very well know, that get so much benefit reportedly from kratom, and it is a story that has been told too many times, and I would hate for it to be repeated, for some profit motivated idiot to ruin it for everyone by doing something stupid. And so I think that right now it's great for everyone to network, to everyone to be friendly, to everyone talk and be open, and see this thing through the finish line. Don't spike the football at the 5-yard line. We're so close to getting kratom in a good spot, and I think we should all be very transparent and very collaborative, and see us through that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I really want to reiterate this. I've listened to, I think, all of your podcasts at this point. I've been doing a lot of manual work when I'm not working on Top Tree, and so I always put this on the background. And you're a great interlocutor. You have great conversations. You bring the right people on, and you're really getting the message out there. And I've got mad respect for you, Brian, and I really appreciate you taking the time to include me with all these incredible figures that I look up to and idolize. So
hell yeah, man. Thanks. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Thank you, Soren Shade and Top Tree Herbs, for everything. Check out the links in the description. Check out Hamilton Season 3. Check out Dr. Carl Hart. The music is Risey. The song is Memories of Thailand. The Kratom Science Podcast was written and produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.